In terms of the agenda, I proposed three parts in email. The first would be to do a round of reflections about the blog series that we co-created. The second is to hear updates about different engagements you have planned, linking your students and your community partners with Betsy, and to use the collective wisdom of the group to troubleshoot any questions you have or things you're excited about, and just to think together about those different events. And then lastly, to think about our face-to-face April 19th, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Betsy Scholar Circle meeting, and think about goals that we have for that. So how does that agenda sound? Good. Okay, I see thumbs ups, and we have Stephanie Woodson joining us too. Great. And so we're just about to jump into item 1 of the agenda, and perhaps if when you speak, for those who can't see each other, if you could introduce yourself again. And so the blog series was our effort to create real-time documentation and scholarship during the play creation process before the Run of Betsy launched, and to have artists and scholars collaborate on that generation of content. And so I'd love to hear any reflections about the content, the effectiveness. Arnoldo, would you like to say anything as framing about the blog series before we do a round?
Thank you. Thank you. Most of all, I want to, this is Arnaldo from Pregones Theater and the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater, and the first thing that I've been thinking and mulling over is the range of content. So this is multimedia. It wasn't just writing. It wasn't just reflecting about theater. It was really opening a window to the way that artists are going about their business. And in some cases, asking folks to riff and to even think, what is it that scholars and students really need and do on the other side? Because we've been talking about the need to for the scholar to think of the artist, and there is a priority there. But oftentimes artists need that reminder, and I think that the series did that rather beautifully. So I was very pleased. I am eager to see in what other ways that content can be can continue to be rebroadcast. What other ways it could be responses can really proliferate. I had expressed this to my peers here, and I think that it's part of. I think Jamie has heard me think about that repeatedly. Alex Trillo, who has really not been active in the cohort, but I'm still hoping that he will be here on Sunday when we meet. He initially thought that there was great promise in asking students to go enter the world of the journal series and then come see the play, but at any point during or before or after, generate their own output, their own reflections. And I had suggested the possibility that if there was a series of microblogs, whether they are, a Twitter length or whether they are longer, we are in a position where we can really rebroadcast that and also try to generate responses from the circle that participated. That's my entry. Thank you so much.
Yes, this is Lindsay Cummings speaking for those of you who can't see me. I too appreciated the range, not just the range of media, writing, images, videos, all of which was very helpful, but the range of perspectives, different kinds of scholars, artists. I love hearing from the actresses. That was wonderful. And I'm interested in what you're saying about students. I'm going to be, when we read the play, which I think is next week on our syllabus, going to have my students I don't think I'll have them read the whole blog series because we're at the point in that semester where that won't happen, but I think I'm going to ask them to assign sort of different pieces to different students so that they become more engaged in reporting back. And then after we see the show, or the small group of us who's going to see the show, I'm hoping that they can write some sort of response. So maybe I can use that response to move into what you're talking about. So I'm glad to hear that you're thinking along those lines.
Sure. Yeah, no, I enjoyed the blog. I enjoyed the rhythm of the blog, the different perspectives. Lindsay, I really enjoyed your reflecting on the idea of empathy. For me, that's every bit as interesting as an artist's perspective on playing the part, and the artist's perspective is every bit as interesting as the empathy. So, I mean, for me, a little unlike you, Arnaldo, I don't put the artist first. I put anybody who's investing in a project sort of horizontally. And to me, scholars who invest are right there with the artist. Of course, I understand the difference of people who are spending all this time actually making the piece. But my sense is that Maribel has had that relationship as a scholar to the work, where she's made a multi-year investment. So I really love breaking those down. And I think the project is really doing that. And I just want to affirm that. Stephanie, I loved you writing about those underutilized resources, the companies. And Ben, I'm actually going to borrow your framing of you were quoting Dudley, the positive and negative collaboration, which I hadn't, I've read a lot of Dudley's work, and I've spoken to him a lot over the years. I never heard him use those terms. I like the ideas. My only problem with it is there is a pejorative connotation to the word negative. And there obviously, I've been very influenced by Boal, and as much as I appreciate the approach of affirming all the positive assets of a group, I don't think there's anything wrong with affirming where we're struggling together, although we struggle around different issues. So I don't really like the notion of positive. I like the idea, but I don't like the language of positive and negative. But I do like the idea, and I think that's a very interesting thing for students to hear before they'd see the piece. Because I joined the scholars cohort kind of late, my syllabus was already done, and so I'm not assigning any blog. I'm not assigning the reading of the play. They all have to see the play, and the $15 tickets make that possible. So thank you. Got 50 SU students who I'm not closely aligned with, but they're all going to see the show. And it was exciting to me that this conservatory group could, that there you were doing the show and they could see it. And then if they want follow-up, I'll send them to the blog. So to me, the online component, last thing I'll say is it continues the problem that I see with digital documentation and communication, which is there's so much of it, and yet this conversation I signed up for right away because I'd get to, at least see you guys' little photos. I'd get to hear your voices. That feeds me. It's a conversation. I don't get that digitally. I get information. That's good. But I think there continues to be a real problem I don't think people always recognize the limits of the digital. It's great what it does, but it doesn't replace things like this. So I love when there are combinations of things like this. Let me put it that way. Thanks.
I can respond a little bit if that's all right. Before I do, and I appreciate the provocation as always, Jan, and I have some thoughts on it that I hope will be useful and not just defensive and argumentative. But I learned a ton. I read the script and then I read all the blog entries, and I just realized, and obviously this is a show that is about so much more than the words on the paper, and I'm really excited to see it. But just, I know for me, the amount the blog entry brought out in the script that it wasn't obvious to me when I was looking at it, was just made my experience of it a whole lot more full. And so, yeah, I imagine for people, I think this is what you said, Lindsay, assigning the script before seeing the show, having the blog entries to contextualize it is so useful. And the range of perspectives is really interesting, and the other sources is interesting, both the scholarly sources and the sources on the history of the production. I mean, it makes it gives you a world around it. I will just briefly about negative solidarity, because frankly there is a little bit of a negative connotation or pejorative connotation. but it's what I meant by it, and I also spend a lot of time with Boal, both literally and metaphorically. It's not an either or; it's a both and. And what I was arguing is that in a lot of activist cultures, including a lot of theater of the oppressed workshops, frankly, there is this emphasis on the shared oppression as if that's the more real thing and the more true thing. And what I see in stuff like in the process that created Betsy, which echoes, like I was saying, people like Angela Davis talking about producing a community, is that you can't, obviously discussing the shared oppressions is important and necessary, but you can't build a culture just on that. And I think we can have a long debate about this, probably not now. I think it's a big failure of certain organizing models, especially around the third world organizing, that frankly keeps turnout low and power building minimal, that it's so much about, fighting the man and not about building a culture. At the same time, and I mean, Harry Boyd talks about, to what extent is the operative question, how can we fight oppression, and to what extent is the operative question, how can we build a democratic society? And those aren't mutually exclusive, but they are different frames, and it's useful to think about it.
Just to throw in for a second, I may have expressed myself badly. I agree, Ben. I really like your piece. It's only the word negative that I didn't like. I agree with the concepts, and I totally agree with you that there's a place for both, and it's important to rethink what the balance is.
Maybe a better term. I think negative was my term, not Dudley's. So I don't want to lay that at his feet. I mean, maybe it's about assets versus deficit. You can talk about it that way. I mean, deficit also has a negative connotation.
I want to thank you, Jan, for can you all hear me? I want to thank you, Jan, for the feedback that you offered. You were extremely generous with everybody who asked for feedback, and I know that the time to do that was, your time is precious, and the amount of time you had to respond was not large, and so I appreciate your willingness to jump in and provide constructive criticism. That is, feedback equals love, and so I acknowledge that. In the future, thinking about platforms, I found the 1,000 words to be quite limiting, and in the final edit, some of what I felt were primary ideas had to be edited away, and so that was to some degree frustrating, albeit an interesting exercise in public scholarship.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that. This is Lindsay speaking. To agree, but also to offer the sort of double-edged sword response, which is, as we think about how these might move or circulate in other ways, my students love bite-sized information. It's certainly not what I always want to give them, but there is a benefit to saying, look, I'm going to send you to this place and you can get something provocative to think about really, really quickly. I don't know if I'm going to be able to successfully sort of convert a culture around them using HowlRound or on this blog for the play, but as we think about how to use scholarship around theater more broadly and how students today like to get and access information when it's sort of like, oh, something that appears in one of their many social media feeds and they click on it and they get an idea and they forward it, there is something about that really, really short format that may be useful and powerful. I have mixed feelings, but I'll just put that out there.
Yeah, I want to echo that, Lindsay. And I also felt frustrated with the length, but for me, I was glad of it. And I think maybe it would be a thing to think about having different pieces of different lengths. Obviously, the introductory post was much longer. And some, I mean, honestly, what I had to say, I don't think needed any more than 1,000 words. But I think what other people had to say maybe did. And I'm very interested, to echo Arnaldo, in thinking about how these can be distributed in and shared in more forms. I'm also curious, I mean, with my fragile ego, I see no comments online. It's like, oh, no one read it, no one cares, which is, and then of course I see no comments on pretty much anyone's. And I don't believe that no one read these things. But I'm curious to know. I'm curious what kind of other opportunities there are for getting feedback other than this circle right now, which I think is great. Given that the comments and the blog seem like they're not the forum that people are using.
This is Jamie. I'll jump in, and then I want to make room for Immaculata by phone. But I was pleased to try this experiment on HowlRound because I think it represents a platform that is broader than, specific platforms around community-based arts or any one organization's platform. They're really about performance broadly. But I would like to, thinking like Ben and a community organizer, and to put that hat on and to say, if our goal is to change the conversation around American theater, what are the most important platforms that we need to insert this into, and who are the most important power players that are setting the conversation, and to pick a few targets. For example, we've talked about the impact it would have to have an excerpt of Maribel's piece in American Theater as a kind of mainstream publication. Immaculata, do you want to jump in here since you can't see us all smiling at you and encouraging you?
Okay, Arnaldo was about to say something, so I muted my phone again. Sorry. Just to give a little bit of an overview of what we've been doing, and we have not yet utilized the blog very much in my classroom. I have read the script and the blog entries, and my students have read the script and the chapter of Eva Vasquez's book on Pregones. They're also working on their own writing their own one-act plays, which is a creative activity that I came up with through about in the middle of the semester. And they're inspired by the play analysis that they're doing on Pregones and other plays, on Betsy and other plays. We will be visiting Pregones Theater next week, where they will be able to really share their thoughts and their questions with the creators of the play. So I think that's sort of substituting a little bit or not necessarily substituting, but we've been focusing on that and preparing that conversation, the face-to-face conversation, since we're so lucky to be so close to the theater and to the rehearsal space, that no, we haven't really utilized the blog so much as another form of conversation. So the blog entries will be available, and they will be materials that my students will be using as they write their final comparative papers. But they haven't utilized them yet. So that's why I was sort of listening to how everybody's thoughts on the blog entries are. I agree that they're incredibly rich and diverse. I was very happy to read, the combination of critical brief essays and the reflections of the actors and creators. So yeah, thank you everybody who has posted. We'll be certainly using this material as a source of more critical thinking on the play as the semester moves on.
I want to jump into everything that I'm hearing is going right to the heart of what I think makes this such a worthwhile undertaking. It seems to me that the multi-voiced element, and Lindsay, I very much, it wasn't just the genre, it wasn't just the media, it's really about the perspectives and the identities, if we look at it from the language of the framing of the journal series. That are going, looking at this work, looking at the different things that connect into the work, and also each of you and your students and the artists and the students as a representative also of a kind of audience. I think all of those positions also speak in ways that are not always interlaced, are not always necessarily in contact, So this work is an opportunity to make those circles overlap. And that's where it becomes so interesting that the disciplines and the way of thinking are at not at odds, but are not familiar to each other. So what happens is a little bit of a rub and a lot of recognition. And Jan, I wanted to point out the case of both Caridad and Elise when Jamie had the overture. We want you to contribute to a blog because we know that you write. And they were like, oh, sure, let me take a look. And then they were like on their phone and they come up to me and they're like, this blog, this HowlRound thing, they want us to write for those things. And there was a sense of misrecognition. Like, I don't belong there. This is not what I do. But I'm so excited. And I'm like, jump into it because that's the idea, right? Make room for that. See how that adds something. And I was excited that it was an education for them too, right? It's a little bit like, wow, I can't believe people sit and write these essays about the work that my peers do or that I do. So I think that speaks also very much to the issue of volume or length as much as context. So being able to excerpt, that's the one strategy that we have used, right? From Roadside's team and Pregones' team, we've been lifting pull quotes and trying to share those and trying to add a modest provocation of some sort. Certainly, that's an experiment that's open and unfinished. I hope again to push it further, but nothing is better than seeing real faces and hearing real voices, and it's really about building those human connections. So fair.
As we transition to the next topic, I'll say the icing on the cake for me is that Pregones had the great wisdom to really feature the blog series in the program. So I love that each of the audience members will see info about all the articles and see excerpts from the series. So we thought that the next part of the agenda could be an open forum to hear from all of you. Many of you have already mentioned some of the things you're doing with your students and the field trips you're planning, and not just students, but whole communities you're bringing, and to hear from you more about those events and engagements, and if you have any questions or if there are any issues you're working through or anything that we can use our group to think about. The floor is yours.
We got 76 people coming to Betsy from South Jersey on Sunday, which is really, really exciting. And I think as I said in the HowlRound blog, I don't really know how they're going to respond, but I think for many of them, it will be their first time in New York, especially the kids. We'll be, driving through Times Square and, past the Book of Mormon to get there. It's fascinating geography. We're going to spend a little time in Central Park and around the Met beforehand. So it's also a little bit about like New York as a day. I think the only kind of the question I have, and the thing I'm still trying to figure out, is opportunities to really process afterwards and tell stories, etc. Because the way this program is set up, and this has basically been handed to us from the foundation, it's very event-based. We do a thing, we do a thing, and we do a thing, and we do a thing. It's not like there's a lot of time built in to do the kind of process and the kind of reflections and the kind of storytelling that I would love to be able to do. Nor are all the people in this program people who really have had a lot of experience doing that kind of work, and so it would be, it's a process to teach that also. My only real operative thought right now would be developing some kind of list of questions and process that could be done on the different buses on the way home. And, because we have this 2.5 hour bus ride after the show, and they'll just seen it and then met the artists afterwards. And so some kind of guided reflection that, I'll only be on one of 3 buses. And so it would be something that maybe a leader in the group, could lead, which is kind of what I'm thinking right now. But if other people have got thoughts and ideas and suggestions for that, either to share with me now or share with me offline, I'd be really grateful for that.
Now, I love that. I know there's a whole tradition with Roadside, and Arnaldo, you'll have to tell me if that's true with Pregones as well, of doing story circles after shows before audiences leave, making circles, and the different, in their case, the different actors sitting amidst the different circles, and letting people just tell a story evoked by the play. And one of the many things I loved about that was, you know, we all get stories evoked when we see things and experience things, and you don't have to feel like, well, how can I respond to theater? What do I know about theater? You don't have to know anything about theater. You just have to be able to catch a story. So it's very, I feel it's very accessible to ask that. And the bus ride is fantastic. I hadn't even thought of that fact, that I knew you were bringing this bus load, which is so cool, but hadn't even thought of that opportunity for processing. And I know that Roadside, you used to use those stories as a kind of research when plays were in development. And I can't help but think it could be a kind of research for you too, in terms of what are some of the modes that invite processing. So that's just a little thought.
There is a tradition in, this is Stephanie, there's a tradition in theater with young people to do what's called performance guides, or for the car ride home kinds of handouts that have question prompts for people to contemplate as they are leaving, and have a discussion in the car ride or in the bus ride away from the theater space. And that might be a useful way of framing it. And you could use quotes or pullouts from the blog series to frame those ideas. And then, given that a bus is long and thin, you might want to think about think, pair, share as a strategy for how you engage people, since you can't be in a circle, obviously, in a bus.
Well, since Jan called it research, I'm wondering if there's enough smartphones and audio recorders that the stories on the buses could be recorded, and then
I was just thinking that.
Form some collective body of new material that then you can jog people's memory back again the next time they come together face to face and start building on those stories.
I love that idea. And I think also, is there a structure set for what the meeting, the actors, talk back, whatever it's going to look like after the show? Or I'm just thinking about, maybe it is possible, as Jan was saying, to get into small circles and just share, a story or two, and then have some kind of larger sharing. Yeah.
Certainly one component that I'm hoping that the students will have a chance to enjoy is the photography exhibit. So these images have been generated in reflection of the general themes of the play, not necessarily about the play. And I think especially whether it's a pre-performance or a post-performance tour of the gallery space, it could really lend itself to, it could really add to the palette there for the folks riding home afterwards. Of course, they have a full day already, so...
No, I think it's a great idea, though.
Okay. And then I wanted to mention that at Pregones, we occasionally use a story circle format, but more frequently we do dialogues and activities around image theater. And one of our artistic directors, Jorge, is putting sort of refashioning some of his tools, some of his handouts into something to be included in a study learning guide that Jamie can tell you more about, but that will certainly be ready this week. So,
great, thank you.
This is a question for the group, I guess. So I feel like in my class already, my students have gotten really comfortable with sharing personal stories and those moments and plays that connect to them. That's so familiar. That's just like this family member, that sort of thing. With this play, I'm interested actually in pushing them beyond that and thinking about the things that aren't the immediately familiar, I feel comfort and recognition, and that's what's exciting. I'm interested in hearing ideas or thoughts for how to particularly prompt that part of the discussion or response, whether it's verbal or some other way.
One thing you might do is ask them, where were their moments of discomfort?
I always go to structure. I don't, yeah, that's a hard question to think about, right? Because what I'm fascinated with are, like your essay, Lindsay, those moments where there is a breakdowns. There are the spaces in between where they rub up in rough ways with one another, and how that leads to structural inequities, or can be the culmination of a history of inequity, right? So those spaces where those are fascinating to me as someone who thinks about what causes change. What does change mean, particularly with performance? It seems to me that finding spaces of recognition is important on an emotional journey, but it doesn't lead to change. And so that is more interesting, to follow that rabbit down the hole, but that is a big hole.
It's also particularly odd in this for me in this instance, because I'm the only Appalachian in the group. So in terms of relating, I'm actually like in the one side where all my students are pretty much all on the other. So I don't know. I'm actually looking forward to that experience and to maybe how that informs the discussion. But
I also think the whole question of audience comes up. And I don't know, this is then would be, I'd throw this back as a question to Jamie and Arnaldo. Well, both the audience and actors, you know, who's allowed to ask what questions? Who's got to bring up a difficult subject? When are there moments when it's got to be someone there's a feeling it has to be someone who's been through something, who even theatrically opens it up to an audience? I mean, certainly there's been lots of debate about those questions over the last, I don't know, especially the last 30 years, I'd say. And I know that the price of the tickets, the kind of, the way Pregones and Roadside reach out to a range of people will probably make this not a typical Midtown Manhattan audience. But I think it would be interesting to know that, because the context of live theater and what is possible and what isn't around uncomfortable questions based on who's on stage and who's in the audience, I think this is going to be, certainly in terms of who's on stage, but quite possibly in terms of who's in the audience, this might be an occasion for that conversation too. That's partly a question, I'm sorry, to Jamie and Arnaldo in terms.
Fair enough. I think that for the most part, our artists, the ensemble, is pretty much open to any question. It doesn't have to come from a place where you earn asking the questions. Questions usually come in one way or another from the heart or from the head, and both places are genuine. There is, I have observed, a kind of process about how to respond to a question. So there is a general desire to often bring the question back to the audience member, to an awareness of the position from which the question is asked. That tends to be, I would say, 80% of the time, very satisfying to the audience member, and satisfying in the sense that it leaves it open and invites more thinking. And there are instances where there is a rejection of that, and then it's about making sure that the dialogue, allowing other people to come in and out of the conversation. But I think that dynamic can be reproduced in any number of settings, including, as I was thinking, the opportunity with the photos. We can talk more about the logistics of what that would look like in Ben's case, because of the number of students present. But we will have an opportunity to interact and dialogue a little bit with members of the cast after the performance.
Yeah, what this raises for me is, I'm thinking specifically, one of the learning engagements we've planned is this day-long institute for teams from Imagining America member schools and their extension programs. So we've got a big group from Cornell, University of Wisconsin, Oregon State, and Ohio State. And they're less familiar with, unlike Lindsay's students, with the experience of taking their own stories and making theater. And so that is a big part of the agenda, but we also have put in some time, and I'm thinking it would be great to structure it around these tensions and controversial questions that the play brings up. So for example, authenticity. What does it mean that we have a Puerto Rican actress playing an Appalachian ancestor, and other questions? So to be able to surface those, I think will be really rich as we just go toward embracing the tension.
Two logistical questions, one a little bigger than the other. The first is I'm just curious about the photo exhibit, like where it is, when it's open. We're hopefully going to get to the theater by 2:30, and so if it's possible to go see it before, great. If not, otherwise, the bigger question, Jamie, is for those of us like me who will be at the Institute this weekend on Saturday, but don't have specific students there. I'm always happy to just be there, observe, take in whatever, but do you see any other roles for us or ways that we can contribute in particular matters?
Thanks. Well, I think the easy question is, and Arnaldo can correct me if I'm wrong, but just before the house of the theater opens, select groups can go up the stairs. PRTT is an amazing renovated firehouse, so you get to go up the staircase and see the exhibit. And we were also thinking, since we're going to invite, for groups like Ben's group, as well as Jan's group, who they know that they can stay in the house and there's going to be some engagement with the artists after the show, we thought we could encourage them to go up the stairs and see the exhibit. The only thing we're just managing is a capacity of 60 allowed upstairs and a house of 200.
Low and shifts.
Exactly. And then I think, as certainly in alignment with Roadside's methodology, that there are no observers and all participants in a story circle. Everyone who's with us in that day-long experience will be part of a group that's either going through story circles or going through Pregonis's approach to image theater and making theater. But it will be great to have you helping us really have a bird's eye view as well, and to pull out the tensions and the principles that we're dealing with, and hopefully to help the teams have some kind of action, because a goal for this engagement, as I imagine for your other engagements, is to really leave teams with some tangibles that they can then take forward into their own practice, whether they're students looking to make this work or faculty looking to integrate it into their courses. Are there any last comments on engagements before we move on to the last topic of our face-to-face on Sunday, April 19th?
Actually, I do have a question. So these SU students are coming on Thursday. So does that mean if they come early, they can see the photo exhibit? And do they know that? Did the person from SU who arranged the tickets, was that discussed, or is that something I should let people know? Because they're not actually my students.
Yes. Am I right, Arnaldo, that they are able prior to the performance to visit?
Yes. It's just a matter of taking the stairs up and making sure they're back on time for curtain. There'll probably be a house monitor of some sort. It's pretty easy going. I don't know that there was a reminder issued with the tickets confirmation, so that may be worthwhile to circulate.
Immaculata, I just want to make space for you since you can't see us smiling.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to add, I know I jumped into the activities that we'll be doing a little bit early in the conversation, but I wanted to add that my students are absolutely fascinated by the fact that there are these people down the road who have devoted their lives to theater, and that they're in their neighborhood. They are really excited about meeting them, and they have questions that are really geared towards the biographical. They really want to know how they got there, and what inspired Betsy, and what inspired them to, to be theater creators, including, the collective creation that they've engaged in throughout the years. So we've discussed that process of collective creation, and they're kind of replicating it through the experience of writing a brief one-act play together in small groups. From there, they will have the option of writing alternative plays to Betsy, since we're also looking at the structure of the play and how the meaning will change. They will be able to explore how the meaning will change if they change a part of it, such as the ending. And then we're reflecting on the relevance of the issues raised by the play to contemporary audiences, and the audiences, my students will be, most of them are South Bronx neighbors, or larger Bronx neighbors, and just to reflect on their own response and the relevance of the issues to them. And also they will be thinking about, what the relevance might be to the communities that they know. So I believe this is really valuable material to share with the creators, to share with the cohort, and I'm really open. I'm wondering what the best way to do this would be. I'm really open to any suggestions you might have as to how we can share some of that information.
Well, maybe we'll come back to that specific question, but I think I can second what Arnaldo said earlier, which is that we have, through our websites, we think of our websites as workshops, not necessarily as, a showcase of polished material. And I think, we're prepared to make room for any and all kinds of responses, whether it's publishing written one-acts or critical reflections. And we're also keeping the virtual exhibit of the photo series open as well. So we're encouraging all audience members and students to also send photography and their digital media stories to build out our online community. So it will be fun to see, but through April, what we've created. And I think our intention is to continue these Scholar Circle conversations through April and May, and to have a proper post-play reflection. So with that, to transition to our last topic in our last 10 minutes, we really put this April 19th conversation as just one marker on a milestone of longer conversations. And so I know some of you from out of town aren't going to be able to make it there in person, but there will be some of you on this call who will be there. And then we'll also be joined by Bob Leonard and 2 faculty and 6 students that he's bringing from Virginia Tech. And there are some out-of-town guests that are coming for Jan's event on Saturday that we're hoping to continue to engage, like Liz Lerman. And then there are other interesting collaborators that we might engage as well. So for example, the program officer at the Joy of Giving Something Foundation, who's sponsoring our photo contest, will be there. And I was thinking someone from the USDAC in New York City would be great to involve, and someone from MALAC. So anyway, would love to hear your thoughts about goals and questions that we can take up in this small gathering Sunday, April 19th, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. In the PRTT space above the theater.
there's one thing that I have in mind, and that is a recurring interest, and it is to highlight that both the kind of work that we're doing here as a group in the cohort, as well as the kind of work that we're putting up on stage in the Roadside Pregones collaboration. These are really longitudinal investments. They're really not none of this can happen in a real short term. As it is, this has been exciting, pretty active, and Jamie will give you the backstory, and I'll give you the backstory, and our friends here will give you their backstories. And at the end of the day, we could have done a lot more. We could have started earlier. And as she said, we want to keep going. I mean, just to do justice to the material. But there's something also about intent, and I think there's also something there about change. You know, to go back to Stephanie's remark, I think that these kinds of investments are relationship building, and they are they carry all of the dynamics that relationships carry, and there's something about a learning that has that sort of sinks over time. So, thank you.
I guess I'll pretty much echo what you said, Arnaldo. What I'm most interested in is, right, it's basically using it as an evaluation. What have we done, and then even more importantly, right, what can we do next? And what is the next step of this? What does this look like now that the show is closed or is soon to be closed? And what do we all want out of it? The other thing that I'm just really interested in is strengthening relationships. Like most of you, I guess, with the exception of Jamie and Jan, I know, entirely as digital images, and would love for there to be some time either during the meeting or before or afterwards, just to be able to get fuller understandings of who we are, and what our work is, and again toward the aim of what are the potentials for collaboration, both as a big group and as smaller groups of people within this network. If the point is to further not only this project but also the wider project of publicly engaged scholarship and intellectually engaged theater making, and these various groups of people engaged in the same project. What could this look like in terms of other projects coming up?
I would love if it were a utopian gathering. I just sat here thinking about, Alternate Roots' 40th anniversary is coming up in a year and a few months. And I was just thinking about, Dudley is one of the founders of Alternate Roots, and alternate roots, alternatives, that there are these, that if you don't like what's happening in the mainstream, one of the many strategies, or at least one of the strategies, is you create an alternate universe. And in fact, this is one of the things that this kind of theater and Boal's theater also have in common. Boal did a beautiful thing with parallel government when Lula lost the first time he ran for president, when Boal worked for him. And so just saying, okay, we can't make it be everywhere, but let's make it be here. What do we really want it to be? And of course, that's very much the spirit of USDAC. I love the idea of some of the USDAC folks being involved. I was thinking of it earlier in the conversation when I think, Jamie, you said that one of the goals of maybe the blog series was to change the conversation around American theater. And I wrote a little note to myself that for me, one of the goals is to change culture, which is one of the lessons of Imagining America for me. How do you do that? Because to me, it's as much about changing culture of higher ed as it is about changing culture of American theater. I want to be in a higher ed that artists are more integrated in. And so I would like us to be able to really articulate, like in our fantasy, what would we like a scholars cohort with Pregones and Roadside to be, and to what extent we got there this first time around, and how far could we go?
I don't know, maybe this is a response to that. This is Lindsay. The thing what Arnaldo said at the very beginning about the sort of longitudinal investment is really powerful to me, because I think one of the things that we're constantly confronting, both in terms of scholarship and in terms of teaching theater, for those of us who are in theater organizations, is the focus on production and how writing about process and long-term investments and creating those opportunities actually for that kind of work for undergraduate students is really, really hard. As a discipline, we focus on product very much. So I'd be interested in more conversation about how we adjust the scholarly discussion to invest in a different way in these long-term collaborative relationships and what it means to talk about that. As I say this, I also have to share the irony that I will not be able to participate in the dialogue, in part because as a scholar, I am desperately trying this month to finish my book on empathy as a dialogue, and it has got to get out the door. So I can't be with you, and it's killing me because I want to build these relationships. I want to know more about everybody's work so that we can work together in the future, because that's exactly what it's all about. So there's that. I hope there will be some sort of record of the formal conversations. I know there's no way to record all the wonderful informal conversations.
Just very quickly to jump on that, Lindsay, I think one reason why we do focus on products so much is because, as we've all been saying, they're documented. And being able to document process in this way may be part of changing that.
Any last closing comments?
I want to say that I'm so grateful for your company. I really am. I've had the pleasure to know Jan for some time, but not really have had the joy to have real quality time, not often enough. And I've had the pleasure to work with Jamie for the past few months, and it's still so much more that I know will come of it. But two things that I often do in my personal practice, or two phrases that I repeat very often, is that the work that I do is about making creative practice viable. That has a lot to do with the communities with which I work, where a lot of people literally give up their creative practice. So I know all too many people of all ages, people who give up very young, people who give up in the middle, and people who give up when they shouldn't have to give up. So there's that. And then there is something that somehow it's maybe not be evident, but is truly informative to that process, which is I want to prove there's intellectual life outside of the university. I love the university. It's my other home, but I want to prove there's intellectual life outside, and I want my artists, peers, friends, producers, collaborators to want that. So I think that this conversation gets me much closer to both of those things, and I appreciate it.
This conversation felt like a breath of fresh air amidst all the things I know you're doing. So thank you so much for making the time.
I will not be able to join y'all, but I am coming to see the play the last weekend. So I will do a quick trip into New York and then a quick trip back to Arizona. It's pretty far.
Oh, I just wanted to second how much I've enjoyed all of the conversations that we've had thus far. It's been really wonderful.
And thank you, Jamie, for working to set this up, and Arnaldo for hosting. And that's been really great. Look forward to meeting you all.
Thank you. We'll be in touch by email. We'll see some of us April 19th. It will be recorded. We'll share the recording, and we'll have another one of these virtual conversations early May.
Goodbye, taken by the tide as I stand alone and cry. You appear to wipe my eyes.